Uncle Neil. How you doing? We're doing an Ohio State preview now. We roll through the Big Ten. Dan Hope of 11 Warriors joins us on the show. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're post Big Ten Media Days. Everybody's sort of breaking down all the things. What's the buzz around the Ohio State media after what happened at Media Days and the things that Ryan Day had to say?
Well, I just think the buzz in general all offseason has just been about, the potential that this team has with all the players who are staying and are back for their senior years on both sides of the ball. And then you add some key pieces through the transfer portal like Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins and Will Howard. All the pieces are in place that this is an Ohio State team that should be contending for a national championship this year. Now, of course, the last few years have been a disappointment in Columbus, not winning that rivalry game against Michigan, not getting to the Big Ten championship game. So they got to accomplish those goals first. But I think, this roster is, as good as we've seen at Ohio State in a long time. And it gives this team the potential to be the best in the country.
All right, let's go right to it then. You mentioned him, Will Howard, the quarterback transfer from Kansas State. This was one of the most coveted guys. Why do you think Ohio State ultimately won his signature, and why did they want him so badly?
Well, I think, in terms of, winning his signature, I think that has a lot to do with, what I just said, the fact that, you just look at this team, you look at the weapons he's going to have around him. He's going to have Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins at running back. He's going to have Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Inniss at wide receiver. He's coming in to an offense now where he has more talent around him than he ever had at Kansas State. And I think that gives him the potential to achieve two big goals he has, that he wants to compete for a national championship and he wants to be an NFL draft pick. And I think, being in this offense, an offense that's produced, several first-round picks at the quarterback position in recent years, I think that gives him, an opportunity to have a chance to accomplish both of those goals. And so I think that's why, Ohio State ultimately won out for him in the end. And I think, in terms of Ohio State choosing to bring him in, he's a guy who has been a starter for at least part of 4 seasons at Kansas State. He's, I think, 27 games as a starter. He was a second-team All-Big 12 guy last year. So he brings a lot of experience. He also brings that dual threat ability, which they really haven't had the last couple years in terms of a quarterback who can run the ball. Now, there's still some questions about Will Howard going into preseason camp. He did not have the best spring. And so I think he's still got to prove in preseason camp that, he's going to be the guy for this offense, that he can do what they need him to do as a passer to take advantage of all those weapons I just talked about. But I think in terms of the decision to bring him in, that was really driven by, the experience that he has, with them not having any other quarterbacks on the roster who have played much at the collegiate level, to be able to bring in someone with that kind of experience can be very valuable.
And you mentioned him not having a great spring, and Ryan Day did not say that he is unquestionably going to be the starter this fall when we start playing with live bullets here in late August. Is there any concern that maybe he won't be the guy and it's going to be one of those, younger like Julian Sayin, Aaron Noland, that they might usurp him in the depth chart?
Yeah, I don't think that he's locked up the starting job yet. I think it's still his job to lose because you don't bring in someone like him with his level of experience to be the backup. But I think Devin Brown had a good spring, and so I think he's, still a real contender in that conversation going into preseason camp. And then you mentioned Julian Sayin. He had a really impressive first spring. I mean, he was the number 1 ranked quarterback in the class. He's somebody that they think very highly of for his future. Do I think the plan is for him to be the starter as a true freshman? Probably not. But I think he's someone who's put himself on the trajectory toward, having a chance to play very early in his Ohio State career. And, there's a question too of, if Will Howard's the starter in week 1, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that he'll be the starter all year long. He's still going to have to go out there and perform and prove he's the right guy for that offense. And so if I was betting on it, I would still predict that Will Howard is going to be that starting quarterback when Ohio State opens the season against Akron at the end of August. But I don't think that it's quite locked up yet.
We hear about all the offensive transfers, and I want to get to them, but just as an overall team perspective, the defense for Ohio State produced tons of NFL talent year in and year out. What is the sort of outlook for the defense this season?
The outlook is it really should be the best defense in the country. You just look at all the talent they have throughout that defense. The defensive line is loaded with Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Tyleik Williams, all staying for their senior seasons. Those are all guys that could have been early round NFL draft picks last year, and they all decided to stay at Ohio State for their senior year. So the defensive line has a real chance to be the best in the country, and the same is true for the secondary. Denzel Burke, another guy who could have been an early round pick in the NFL draft last year, coming back for his senior season. Davis and Igbinosun, Jordan Hancock. I mean, this was a secondary that led the way for Ohio State to have the number one pass defense in the country last year. They brought back 4 of the 5 starters. The only one they lost was Josh Proctor, and they replaced him with arguably the best safety in the country in Caleb Downs. And so this was an Ohio State defense that was already one of the best in the country last year. If all goes according to plan, it should be the best in the country this year.
Okay, Quinshon Judkins getting a ton of love in the preseason. He was electrifying at Ole Miss. Where does he fit in to this Ryan Day Ohio State offensive scheme?
Well, it's going to be really interesting to watch it play out because you've got 2 guys who I would say are both among the top 5 running backs in the country, in Quinshon Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson. And so, I don't think it's necessarily going to matter who the starter is at running back between those 2 because I think they're both going to play a lot. I would anticipate that both will start games over the course of the season. But, I think just to bring in a guy who's been a 2-time All-SEC running back already, and then to pair him with TreVeyon Henderson. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better 1-2 punch with, Henderson being as explosive as he is, Judkins, showing just the durability and consistent production that he's had at Ole Miss. It's an elite tandem at running back. The depth behind them is a little bit questionable right now because the only other scholarship running backs they have are true freshmen. But if those 2 stay healthy, that should be one heck of a running back tandem this year.
Is it undefeated or bust for the Buckeyes this year?
I don't know if I'd go undefeated or bust, but I think that we've heard Denzel Burke say it multiple times that they do think it's natty or bust. I think winning the national championship, that's definitely the goal. I think anything short of that will be considered a disappointment in Columbus this year. In the 12-team playoff format, you could lose a game in the regular season and it's not going to derail your national championship hopes. So I can't say undefeated or bust, but I do think national championship is the expectation, and anything less than that would be seen as a disappointment.
The discussion is always about the Michigan game and how Ryan Day has been unable to win that game over the past couple of seasons. And it's always the last game of the year, so it's usually the one that sticks in the memory the longest to the fan base. And there have been some out there who are saying, like, if he doesn't beat Michigan this year, the seat gets really hot. Do you buy into that at all?
I do, because it's such an important game at Ohio State. It's a game that they talk about 365 days a year, and so it's a game that you have to win as the Ohio State coach. And they haven't won it since 2019 because the 2020 game was canceled. And so I think, especially going into this year, Jim Harbaugh's gone. Michigan's lost the vast majority of its lineup from last year's national championship team. You're hosting the game at home. If you don't win this one, there's going to be some serious questions. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, if he loses the Michigan game, he automatically gets fired, because, they could lose to Michigan, still make the playoffs, still theoretically win the national championship. So, we have to see how the totality of the season plays out. But, there's no doubt there's a ton of pressure on Ryan Day to beat Michigan this year. And if that doesn't happen, there's going to be a lot of hard questions that he has to answer, because that's just how important that rivalry game is to Ohio State.
The other major sticking point on the schedule for me that I see, they do get Michigan at home this year. But October 12th, the trip to Eugene, could be 2 top 5 teams. What do you make of how Oregon matches up with Ohio State?
Yeah, I think that's going to be, to me, the game of the year in the Big Ten. I think that could be a preview of the game we ultimately see in Indianapolis in December between those two teams. And, you just talk about, another team in the Big Ten that has the firepower on both sides of the ball to hang with Ohio State. I think Oregon is that team. I mean, I think their offense, I think, will probably be the best in the Big Ten with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. Two great receivers in Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. Really good offensive line, really good running back. I think they probably have the most complete offense in the Big Ten, and their defense should be really solid too. So I think that's the team that, when I look at, if Ohio State's not going to go undefeated, if they're going to trip up somewhere in the regular season, I think that's the game you circle on the calendar because, it's really, I mean, they do play Iowa the week before, and Iowa's, supposed to be a good team this year. But I think that's really the game you look at is like the big test of that first half of the season. And then when you pair that with having to fly across the country to go play at Autzen Stadium, I think that's the game that's going to be the biggest challenge of a regular season for the Buckeyes.
Could we see maybe the start of a budding rivalry with the way Oregon's been so good over the past, I don't know, 15 years? They've become a national brand. They've got unlimited Nike money, and Ohio State with all the tradition and being one of the most recognizable brands in the country for, the better part of 75, 80 years now. Could this be the start of something with adding Oregon to the Big Ten?
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily go as far as to call it a rivalry yet, but I think that in terms of a competitive rivalry, I think it certainly has the potential to be that, in large part because of what we're seeing on the recruiting trail. We're seeing Ohio State and Oregon go head-to-head for a lot of recruits right now, and Oregon's won a few battles over Ohio State this summer. And so I think the fact that they're recruiting against each other so much, and now they're going to be playing each other in the Big Ten, you would think that both of these teams are going to consistently be in the running for Big Ten championships the way things are going right now. I think these two teams are going to be seeing a lot of each other, both on the field and on the trail in years to come. And that's certainly going to make, Oregon a team for, Ohio State fans. But I think, kind of like Penn State's been in recent years, I think Oregon kind of has a chance to potentially kind of move into that spot as kind of that team that, Ohio State's always circling on the calendar every time they play them.
All right, Dan Hope, 11 Warriors. Give us your record prediction for the Buckeyes this year, and where will they ultimately finish at the end of the season?
I am going to go with they're going to be 11-1. I think they are going to lose that game at Oregon, but I think they will still make the Big Ten championship, and they will ultimately beat Oregon in the rematch in Indianapolis to win the Big Ten title.
Right on. It's Dan Hope from 11 Warriors. You can check him out at 11warriors.com. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been fun.